So, and then we'll have a kind of, once we finish with the kind of informal talks, we'll have a kind of question and answer session. And I guess the whole objective of this evening is we're beginning to do these road shows again, where we're going around Ireland, and it's a way of helping people network and kind of getting a movement together that can really make action for change and reform of the church, reform in a good way rather than reform that we hear all too much about, the reform of these kind of liberal reforms. We want a renewal and a restoration of good, strong Catholic tradition, especially from our bishops. And Mr. Early's late. So welcome.
Thank you.
And so I'll hand over to John, who will give you an overview, and we'll say a little introductory prayer as well.
So I'd just like to begin with a prayer to St. Joseph. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. O glorious St. Joseph, to you God committed the care of his only begotten Son amid the many dangers of this world. We come to you and ask you to take under your special protection the children God has given us. Through holy baptism they became children of God and members of his holy church. We consecrate them to you today, that through this consecration they may become your foster children. Guard them, guide their steps in life, and form their hearts after the hearts of Jesus and Mary. St. Joseph, who felt the tribulation and worry of a parent when the child Jesus was lost, protect our dear children for time and eternity. May you be their father and counselor. Let them, like Jesus, grow in age as well as in wisdom and grace before God and men. Preserve them from the corruption of this world, and give us the peace, the grace, one day to be united with them in heaven forever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. So, I've just given a brief overview of the Lumen Fidei Institute. We launched it officially in July of 2017. And one of the things that we do is, as everybody knows, there's a crisis in catechesis. People don't know the faith, they don't recognize it. So we started producing books. And these are books that were in print in the past and have gone out of print, and we just started republishing them. So the first one we brought in was Don't Go to Hell. And this came about because there was an archbishop who was on the radio, and he was asked the question, do you believe in hell? And he replied, I believe in heaven. And the interviewer came back to him a second time and said, but do you believe in hell? And he said, well, I'd like to talk about heaven because that's our destiny. And then he finally asked him a third time and said, do you believe in hell? And the bishop said, well, hell could possibly exist, but if it does, we don't know who's there. Now, the bishop in that situation has actually committed an act of heresy, because hell is a clear definition of the church, a teaching of the church. And for a bishop to say that hell might exist, he's actually crossed the line. The other thing is, we do know who's in hell. We know that Judas went to hell, and we know that any Catholic who dies in a state of mortal sin goes to hell for all eternity. That's Catholic Church teaching, has always been Catholic Church teaching. So we published the book Don't Go to Hell to teach people about hell and to warn them that it's a serious place and don't go there. And most people do not go directly to heaven. And we have this again from the scripture. Our Lord said, wide is the road, and many they are who travel the road to perdition, but narrow is the road to salvation, and few they are who find it. So those who don't go to hell and who don't make heaven straight away, they'll go to purgatory. So we brought out a book on purgatory. And again, the cover of this book has, it's the shirt of Joseph Lelou. And Joseph Lelou's father died before his mother, and he left money for masses to be said for his wife's soul after she would pass. And Joseph, a bit of a scoundrel, out on the beer and partying and stuff like that, didn't get the masses said. And one night his mother appeared to him, and she basically berated him and said, you didn't get those things. And then she laid her hand on his shirt, and you can see the handprint of it. And that shirt is actually in one of the churches in Rome. They have an image of it there's a museum in Rome dedicated to the Holy Souls in Purgatory, the Church of the Sacred Heart of Suffrage in Rome. They have several different things of that. So we just thought purgatory is a good thing for people to know about purgatory. And then the reason why people go to hell and go to purgatory is because of sin. And so again, people don't talk about sins. You'll often go to Mass and they say, Father, for our faults and failings, forgive us. Well, faults and failings, sometimes we're not really responsible for those, but we are responsible for our sins. You cannot sin by accident. So we found this great series of talks given by Cardinal Henry Edward Manning, and we produced that in the booklet, Sin and Its Consequences. then we were at the Divine Mercy Conference is just over. So Anthony said to me this year, he said, John, maybe we should get a separate table for the Lumen Fidei Institute. So we applied to the Divine Mercy Conference. They sent me back a nice letter. Dear stallholder, we're happy to accept you. You can do this. Here's your free tickets and this sort of stuff. Set up your table and that. So that was great. We didn't think any more about it. On the Sunday before the Divine Mercy Conference, I received this phone call. And I said, John, yes, you're the secretary of the Lumen Fidei Institute. I said, yes, I am. Do you have a spiritual director for the Institute, John? I said, well, I have a spiritual director myself, but for the Institute, no, we don't have it. Well, it's kind of a requirement. I said, oh, really? I said, well, Cardinal Raymond Burke is our patron and Bishop Athanasius Schneider is also our patron. Is that good enough? I said, well, I'm not so sure. She said, but we have to do this. So she said, we always do this anyway. So I said, oh, can I ask you a question? She said, yes. I said, well, I was at the Divine Mercy Conference under a different name 3 years ago. You never asked me had I got a spiritual director. You never asked me anything about my organization. You just gave me the table, so what's different this time? Oh, she said, somebody probably recommended you. So I said, well, Anthony Murphy is the editor of the Catholic Voice. He has a stand there. He's also the director of the Lumen Fidei Institute. Is that not good enough? So she said, look, send me on an email about what you have, who your patrons are, etc. So I did that and sent off the email the following morning, just indicating about Cardinal Burke and Bishop Schneider. And then I got an email from the chairman of the Divine Mercy thing saying, oh, could you get a recommendation from your local bishop for your organization? So I contacted Anthony. I said, Anthony, somebody's whispering in somebody's ear. They don't want us at the conference. So Anthony made contact, and we basically said, look, okay, we won't come as Lumen Fidei Institute. We'll have 2 tables on the Catholic Voice to do that. So Anthony and Kim arrived at the Divine Mercy Conference, and we found out that the reason they didn't want us there, because at this stage I knew they didn't want us there, was because we're saying that homosexual acts are immoral. They did not want this done. And it was actually the Archbishop who decided that he didn't want it done. He didn't want our book, Making Gay Okay. He didn't want things like a Catholic response to gay pride being there. So we're going to start advertising these books as the book the bishop doesn't want you to read. But like the fact that Catholic Church teaching on homosexuality is not allowed at the Divine Mercy Conference. So Anthony was talking, he met the director there, and he said, well, the Catechism of the Catholic Church says the same thing. Does that mean you can't promote the Catechism of the Catholic Church at the Divine Mercy Conference? And then it escalated to a situation where Anthony's a very crafty man. He left, came back to the hotel. The Archbishop had said the Mass, and suddenly when the Archbishop was coming out, there was Anthony Murphy to say, hi, Your Grace. So in the heat of the conversation, the Archbishop made some defamatory remarks about the Lumen Fidei Institute. And so those were brought to his attention, and eventually, thanks be to God, he did actually apologize. But that's basically the sort of scenario that we're in. And we, as you know, we're having a conference on Tuesday, and then suddenly yesterday we started getting phone calls from the hotel. Oh, we hear there's a protest, we hear this is happening, and we're not sure if we can accommodate you. And so we think, oh, the same person that was whispering is whispering again. So we're doing that. I just sent a response to the hotel. They told us, first of all, they didn't know about our protest. And we said, we're not having a protest. We're having a rosary procession. That's not a protest. This is not an action against bishops. This is just, we're going prayerfully. We're handing in a petition. We're walking down. We're not going, there is no protest. So today I just responded to them because I got this, Anthony had spoken to someone in the hotel, and the next thing I got an email from the general manager of the hotel, and he's suddenly concerned about health and safety because there's lots of cars around the hotel, and if you've got people gathering there. So I sent him an email, and I basically said to him that, well, he doesn't want us starting outside the hotel. So I said, okay, we'll start on the footpath outside the car park, that's no problem. And I also said to him, I just let him know that we're actually in communication with the Garda Sergeant in Maynooth, and I'm sure she'll take care of all the health and safety. He's worried about the reputation of his hotel. Basically, they have a very good relationship with the Irish bishops, and apparently many of those in Maynooth are actually members of the health club and fitness centre in the hotel, so they don't want to damage that relationship. But when they start talking about health and safety for a procession that's going to be managed by the Gardaí, you just know that they don't want to tell us outright, we actually don't want you here because we're afraid you'll damage our thing. So that's basically what it is. So a Catholic response to gay pride was written by our Bishop Athanasius Schneider. We have that one there. The other thing I can tell you as a fact, as a parent, no parent will tell you that they want one of their children to be a priest, one to be a guard, one to be a civil servant, and one to be a homosexual. You will never hear a parent saying that. And because nobody is born gay or nobody's born with homosexual desires, it's conditioned. That means that it is possible to prevent it. And sometimes parents make mistakes. We know that any of us who are parents, you know, sometimes I've sit down with some of my children and they say, you know, Dad, when I was 8, you said, and I'm thinking, really? I didn't say that. But they remember it. So children can be very sensitive in certain things. So this guy, this is Dr. Gerd van den Aardweg. He's been a counsellor for 40 odd years at least. He's in his 80s now. And he was actually due to give this talk at our conference in Dublin, but his wife got sick. So we produced his talk there. It's just tips for parents as to what you can do, little things that what to avoid. One of the other things that we do is we've just produced the start of this bi-monthly kind of magazine we send around to people across the church. Little small thing. This one on the Christ of the Church, the other one over there is about the welcoming. And again, it's just about bringing little issues up to people and getting the word out. Another publication that we have, and this was proving very popular now, Dr. Thomas Ward. Now, he gave a talk at our conference last year, and this is the base of the talk, but he basically talks about 4 revolutions. You had the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Sexual Revolution, and then here it has the Vatican Revolution with a question mark behind it. Now, people here will know that there has been infiltration of the Catholic Church, and we know that Our Lady in Fatima warned about the communists and how they would do it, and the various different methodologies that they use. So this book, he goes through, not in great detail, but it's just brief, gives you an appetizer. He's got Karl Marx there, Friedrich Engels, Alexander Kollontai, Leon Trotsky. He talks about the, what's the school in Germany? The Frankfurt School, and about how all that came and how that was shut down, and then they moved over to America and they just rebuilt it. So again, copies of it there. So there's copies of all of those over there. We're not doing a book sale tonight. If you want to take them, the main thing is to get them out there. If you want to leave a donation, that's great. The fact that the back of all of these books, it has our contact details. And quite often I will get a phone call. I've picked up something in the back of the church and it had your number on it. Can you get me more of these? So it's just another way, simple way of spreading the word, just leaving these things in the back of the church and doing that. So as I said last night, I was in a little bit of trouble at home at the beginning of this week because I got quite grumpy and annoyed, and I was just in a bad mood. And the reason for that was we've been homeschooling our children since 2005, so I had lost touch with what's going on in the education system. And as you know, there's a new bill going through the Dáil and Charlotte McQuaid. So I started doing the research and stuff like that. But like, I hadn't realised how far these guys have got with their agenda. And I came across the HSE, and they're publishing this magazine on their health. And they've been going around the country training groups, an average of about 20 people all over the country, to teach and talk to children about sex. And like, you know, when in the past, if you found an adult talking to one of your kids about sex, if you were a man, you'd probably hit him. If not, you'd be calling the guards and saying, what's going on here? But now they're training people to go into schools and do this to children. So I got a bit grumpy on that, and that was, you know, because that's the stage that it's at. So with that, then I started doing other research, and I just started thinking about the deception. And one of the things that I thought about was the abortion referendum. It's one of the things you come up with people. People are very disappointed. Oh, look what's happened. As I said to people, you know, the abortion referendum wasn't lost in May of last year. It's been a campaign that's been going on since 1983. But the abortion referendum, here's how the English Guardian newspaper had their headline the day after the referendum. Ireland has voted by a landslide to repeal its near total ban on abortion. An extraordinary victory for women's rights that seals the country's transformation from bastion of religious conservatism to one of Europe's most tolerant democracies. That's the Guardian. Leo Varadkar welcomed the result, saying, "What we have seen today is the culmination of a quiet revolution that has been taking place for the past 10 or 20 years. Only notice the word revolution there now. And Leo Varadkar also said, "We are actually a nation that is united, and we want to make this change." Now I can prove that Leo Varadkar was not telling the truth when he said this. How many people in this room are opposed to abortion legislation in this country? Can we have a show of hands, please? So, either Leo Varadkar is not telling the truth, or none of ye belong to the Irish nation. Because he said, as a nation, we are united. So, we are not united as a nation, as I said, unless none of you are part of the Irish nation. Now, the Catholic Church is the upholder of truth. And I just wanted to get a little quote here from Cardinal Gerhard Müller, produced a Manifesto of Faith. And he says, The church is not a man-made association whose structure its members voted into being at their will. It is of divine origin. Christ himself is the author of ministry in the church. He set her up, gave her authority and mission, orientation and goal. The admonition of the apostle is still valid today, that cursed is anyone who proclaims another gospel. Even if we ourselves were to give, or an angel from heaven, from Galatians, the mediation of faith is inextricably bound up with the human credibility of its messengers, who in some cases have abandoned the people entrusted to them, unsettling them and severely damaging their faith. Here the word of Scripture describes those who do not listen to the truth and who follow their own wishes, who flatter their ears because they cannot endure sound doctrine. And he references Timothy there. And then he says the task of the magisterium of the church is to preserve God's people from deviations and deflections in order to guarantee them the objective possibility of professing the true faith without error. So that's what the church does. It's a divine institution that proclaims the truth. So the church is the upholder of truth. Now, mathematics is what's known as a pure science. You can demonstrate that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and that it will always equal 4. So let's have a look at the referendum result last year from a mathematical perspective. Now, I'm not trying to deny the tragedy of what has happened, but I just want to expose the lies that very few people hear about. In May 2018, there were 3,367,556 people registered and eligible to vote in the referendum. Of those people, 1,429,981 voted to allow the government to legislate for termination of pregnancy. That represents just 42.26% of the electorate. 723,632 voted no to the referendum. 1,207,901 eligible voters, representing 35.87% of the electorate, did not vote in the referendum. And 6,042 voters, or 0.18%, spoiled their votes. So what this tells us, from a purely mathematical point of view, is that 1,937,575 people, or 57.54% of the electorate, did not vote to allow the government to legislate to terminate pregnancies. We cannot say how these people would have voted if they had voted. That's pure speculation. But regardless of whether even 90% of them would have voted in favour of allowing the government to terminate pregnancies, the fact remains that 57.54% of the Irish electorate did not give permission to the government to legislate as it has legislated. And we call this democracy. And what it also tells us about democracy is that democracy may not work very well as a form of government, or if it does work, it's very difficult to create a true democracy. And true democracy means majority rules. Now, if the majority are taking a position that's immoral, well, then you're in trouble in a democracy. But it might also tell us that we do not live in a truly democratic country where the majority make the rules. In the abortion referendum, a minority of the electorate, just 42.46%, carried the day against the majority of 57.54% who did not give their permission. In relation to democracy as it operates in the Western world, it's interesting to know that Adolf Hitler and his party were democratically elected in Germany in the early 1930s, and that he took power with only 33% of the vote. This is called democracy. You can see that it's a lie, and we know who the father of lies is. Another example, in Ireland, our current Minister for Children and Youth Affairs only achieved 4.23% of the votes of the electorate in her constituency. She got 6.63% of the first preference votes. She wasn't elected until the 16th count. She has very little voter support amongst the people of Ireland, and yet she has been given custody of the portfolio for children and young people. Again, democracy Western style. It's lies. And we have had several coalition governments in this country where small parties such as the Labour Party and the Progressive Democrats have been given government positions and been allowed to influence government policy despite having less than 10% of support from the electorate. I think the lowest percentage was the Progressive Democrats. I think at one stage they had just under or just over 5%. So a party that represents 5% of the people is actually creating government policy for the majority. And the reason why this is because the two parties that the people have voted consistently to have in government as a coalition, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, because of their past history, refuse to accept the will of the people and to form a coalition government, when at certain times up to 80% of the population actually voted for that. Now, I'm not saying that that would have made a better government. It might have, because they would have been keeping a check on each other. But the thing is, it's not democracy when you have a small party with only 5% in it. So I was looking again, another thing I came across was, in part of my research, the Department of Foreign Affairs. So recently I've heard that the Department of Foreign Affairs has said it will launch a new initiative on sexual and reproductive health and rights in the developing world as part of the work of Irish Aid. They also said that coherence with our domestic policies has always been a key priority for Ireland in our international development programmes, and this will continue to be the case, unquote. But our domestic policies now allow the killing of certain innocent human beings in their mother's wombs. So not content with killing Irish human beings, it looks like the Department of Foreign Affairs also wants to lift the current restrictions on killing little black babies in foreign countries which experience poverty, and they want to use Irish taxpayers' money to do this. Another interesting aspect that I came across in this, looking at the Department of Foreign Affairs, is that the Department of Foreign Affairs is opposed to female genital mutilation, particularly in African countries. However, if you call female genital mutilation gender reassignment surgery, then female genital mutilation suddenly becomes okay. The HSE website tells us that those who suffer from delusional gender dysphoria, quote, you may decide to have surgery to permanently alter your sex. You can't alter your sex. If I cut my arm off, I'm a one-armed man. I'm still a man. I haven't changed my humanity or anything. You should only do this if you've completed your social transition and you and your care team feels you're ready. The most common options are discussed below, and it basically tells these women and men which parts of their body they can have removed surgically. It's genital mutilation. The most common, obviously, you can talk to members of your team and the surgeon at your consultation about the full range available. And again, on a little bit more research of this, I found that the HSE, they don't do these operations in Ireland at the moment, but they have funded and sent 28 people abroad for this surgery at a cost of something like $845,000. And again, this is what's going on. But this means that the HSE are promoting not just female, but male as well, genital mutilation. And we're all to go along with this. Oh, this is cool because, oh, well, they're transgender. Really? Prove it. Oh, well, she said she's a man. So, female genital mutilation is still female genital mutilation, regardless of what you call it. And this just shows us how powerful the global LGBT movement has become. It has now become a religious cult which does not allow any dissent. On an interesting note, there's a political journal in the UK, someone sent me an article from it, called Spiked. The author is a guy called Brendan O'Neill. I presume he must have Irish roots somewhere. But he's talking about, there was a school in a predominantly Muslim area in England, and one of the teachers authored this book on homosexuality, promoting the whole gender. So the Muslims were a little bit upset. So they started campaigning against it, and on one day 600 pupils were withdrawn from the school for a day in protest. So Brendan O'Neill writes, liberal and left-leaning observers have found themselves doing something they never normally do, criticising Muslims, specifically Muslim parents in Birmingham who have successfully pressured the local primary school to stop teaching their kids about homosexuality and genderism. Apparently, it is outrageous for parents to exercise moral authority over their very young children, and instead they should trust the state to impart the correct moral wisdom to their offspring. That's the undertone of the coverage of this controversy, and officialdom knows better than a child's own parents how that child should be raised and morally instructed. Later on he continues, horrendous as this may seem to those who think they are right about everything, the fact is that there are people out there who disagree with you about numerous moral and personal matters. There are communities that do not think same-sex marriage is morally equal to traditional marriage. There are people who do not believe a man can ever become a woman, no matter how many hormones he takes or surgeries he undergoes. There are fairly significant numbers of people who don't agree that their kids should be taught about gay sex or any kind of sex for that matter. So it goes on in that vein. But it's interesting that when enough parents, in this case they were Muslim parents, but when they came together and said, you're not doing this, the school backed down. Now the case is not over yet because they're probably afraid of a bit of jihad over there. But again, it just shows you that the rules seem to be a little bit different for some religions than for others. I would hope that if enough Catholic parents were to actually do the exact same thing, they would get the same results. But then you would also find that the local imam was very much in support of these parents. I'm not sure if our local Catholic imams would be in favour of supporting parents. With the whole thing of what's going on in the education system with regards to the way the sex education and transgenderism is being moved into the schools, one of the things I've been talking about recently, and I recommend to parents especially, but to everybody, all Catholics, well, we should all be educating ourselves. Pope Pius XI's encyclical Divini Ilius Magistri. It's a very interesting encyclical. That's why I recommend it. And as I say, especially parents, and dare I say it, I recommend it to bishops as well. So I'd like to just quote from some of that. This is from Numbers 11 to 15. Harmoniously combined by God, into which man is born. 2, namely the family and civil society, belong to the natural order. The 3rd, the church, to the supernatural order. In number 12, he says, in the first place comes the family, instituted directly by God for its peculiar purpose, the generation and formation of offspring. For this reason, it has priority of nature and therefore of rights over civil society. Now, that's something that parents need to hear more often, that the family has priority of nature and therefore of rights over civil society. Nevertheless, another important point, the family is what is known as an imperfect society, since it has not itself all the means for its own complete development, whereas civil society is a perfect society. And when he says that, he's not saying that civil society is great, he's just saying it's a perfect society in that the civil society is able to provide for all the means of its citizens, having in itself all the means for its peculiar end, which is the temporal well-being of the community. And so in this respect, that is in view of the common good, it has preeminence over the family, which finds its own suitable temporal perfection precisely in civil society. So in certain areas, the civil society has authority over citizens, the temporal well-being of the community, but when it comes to the family and the children, the parents have divine authority over their children, and their authority has priority of nature over the civil society. He then comes on to the 3rd society into which man is born through baptism, when he reaches the divine life of grace in the church, a society of the supernatural order and of universal extent, a perfect society because it has in itself all the means required for its own end, which is the eternal salvation of mankind. Hence, it is supreme in its own domain. Consequently, education, which is concerned with man as a whole, individually and socially, in order of nature and in order of grace, necessarily belongs to all 3 societies. So all 3 societies have an input into education: the civil society, the church, and the parents. And in due proportion, corresponding according to the disposition of divine providence, to the coordination of the respective ends. And then he says, and first of all, education belongs preeminently to the church, by reason of the double title in the supernatural order conferred exclusively on her by God himself, absolutely superior, therefore, to any other title in the natural order. So, when you read this carefully, it becomes very obvious what one of the problems we were faced with in Ireland is. It's a lack of proper Catholic education. The society of the church, under its rulers in Ireland, are not exercising their authority properly over the schools, because the church is of the supernatural order. It is the supreme when it comes to the church. The parents have divine authority to ensure that their children are educated properly within the church, and the church has a responsibility. It is subsidiary to that, but the church has the overall responsibility. The state has the duty to provide the temporal means necessary to help the family to provide that education for its children. So that's one of the main problems we have in this country, is that in Ireland, the Catholic Church has lost control of the schools under their care. And you have talk about the Catholic Church, many people, including Catholics, saying, oh, the Catholic Church needs to divest schools. And I said, why should they? These schools are owned by the church. They were funded and built by parents and grandparents and our ancestors. When you look back at the history of this country, the history of education, the Nano-Nagels and the Blessed Edmund Ignatius, what was he saying? Edmund Ignatius Rice, like those schools are founded. And just thinking those two, they both founded schools during the penal times, when it was actually illegal to set up a Catholic school. And it's also very interesting that Nano-Nagel was opposed by her bishop when she was setting up her Catholic school. But to divest the Catholic schools, it's not an option. And one of the main reasons it's not an option is because a Catholic can never give over his property knowing that it's going to be used for an immoral purpose. So if the bishops say, okay, Mr. Government, you can have this school, and this school, well, what are you going to be teaching in those schools, Mr. Government? Are you going to be teaching that transgenderism is okay, that it's okay to be an atheist? Well, then the church can't give you the school because we will be acting immorally to give that school to you. The exact same thing carries for the hospitals. The Catholic hospitals cannot be given to the state. Now, myself and Anthony were discussing this earlier on, and said like in England the adoption agencies were forced to close. I don't think the adoption agency should have closed. They should have allowed the government to come in and forcibly shut them down and say, no, we're not complying with your dishonest and immoral directions. We will stand firm. Instead of just closing the doors and saying, oh no, we can't do this now because you're telling us we have to adopt things. So if the government tells you you have to do something immoral, you're just going to close down, apply that to the family situation. You must teach your children about LGBT. Oh, I'm not going to do that, Mr. Government. Here, have my children. Really? So we have to fight these things, and we have to stand up and do that. That's really all that I was looking at. As I say, I didn't have anything. We decided we'd have this kind of more informal today. In the education, one of the things that, when you look at the schools and what's happening, at the Divine Mercy Conference, a woman came up to me. Her daughter is being trained in St. Patrick's College in Dublin as a teacher. That's a Catholic school. They get a day's or a couple of days training, or in the second installment, the second year, they do this LGBT training. And apparently all of the primary schools in Ireland must stock these LGBT books, like Johnny has two daddies and so-and-so has two mammies and all that sort of stuff. And it's all propaganda. So what now? What now is, if you look at the Acts of the Apostles, you know, we're back at that time where Ireland has become a pagan society, but we've got to start regrouping and start building Catholic communities, where Catholics get together, like on a night like this, and these people stay in touch with each other, they discuss the things, they trash them out, find a good priest if you can, but we have to speak out. And our focus must be Catholic first, God first, and country second. So we have to make sure that what we do is Catholic, because the primary battle that we're in is the battle for the salvation of souls, and it's a spiritual battle. Now that doesn't mean that everything has to be, you know, oh, let's go and pray 5 rosaries out to the dog. That may not be a bad thing, but as well as that, there must be Catholic action. Catholic prayer must lead to Catholic action. Catholic action without prayer will flounder. So we must get those things right. Charlotte McQuaid Bruin, and there's a couple of them there, and one woman in that group organised an online petition. They were looking for 7,000 signatures. By yesterday, they had 5,500 signatures just to protest this RSE bill that's going to the Dáil. Now, the other thing, and part of the reason why I was getting a little bit, you know, you can get upset with this when you realise how far behind we are, is that this bill that's going to the Dáil, while it's bad, it's a rubber stamp. All of this stuff is already in the schools. They are already doing it. As I say, a woman from Cavan, in a small rural village in Cavan, rang me to say that she was at her daughter's house, and the 5-year-old daughter came in, and she said, asked her mother, is it okay to have 2 mammies? And Granny decided she would see how the daughter answered. And the daughter said, well, that might be nice, but it's better to have a mammy and a daddy. And the 5-year-old child said, oh, I'm so glad, because I thought daddy would have to leave. So in the 5-year-old's mind, the fact that she was told to get 2 daddies represented a threat that her father might have to leave the family home. And so this is what they're doing, the 5-year-old kids. The minute conference, which Anthony's going to talk a bit about, again, this is a procession. It's not a protest. On our own as men, we can do an awful lot, but we cannot do anywhere near what Our Lady can do. And I say this is a spiritual battle, so we're going to march under Our Lady's banner, Our Lady of Fatima, to the bishops and present them with a petition. Now, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, I don't expect any response from the Irish bishops to a petition. But at least when the time comes and they say, well, have you done everything? And we start organising and taking action, well, we'll say, well, hold on a minute, bishops. We asked you to get involved in this. You didn't want to. So if you're not going to, because we cannot depend on our government to help us live Catholic lives. And unfortunately, at this point in time, we cannot depend on our bishops to help us to live Catholic lives, because they're in a situation where, for whatever reason, all the time it's compromised. I had a phone call today from a woman up in the north of Ireland. 30 of them gathered outside St. Patrick's Academy in Dungannon. The school has just finished a £27 million sterling refurbishment and expansion, and the school is being opened. Archbishop Eamon Martin came, celebrated Mass at the school. But who was opening the school? President Michael D. Higgins, who signed abortion into law just at the beginning of this year. And he's being invited to open a Catholic school. And when I looked at the website, the photographs were very, very carefully choreographed. The woman wasn't actually inside, so she said she cannot tell me whether the Archbishop actually shook hands with the President and what they think, but she did tell me that they had organised an awful lot of letters, emails, and stuff like that to the Archbishop thing. But when you look at the website, there is no photograph there of the 2 men present. They've kept them all very, very carefully segregated. Now, whether the fact that the President wasn't at the Mass was actually organised, but as this woman said, in the 32 counties of Ireland, could they not have found a Catholic to open a Catholic school? But they had to pick someone who had legislated for abortion, and we can't say how many children will die as a result of that, and yet, come on in, open up our school, and let's take some smiley photographs. So that's basically part of it. So the other thing with regards to the procession not being a protest is, I was just listening to this American priest with a New York accent, and he just reminds us that we must always have the utmost of respect for our priests. Even if they're bad men or doing bad things, we must have respect for them. And he says that priests and bishops, and I think he's quoting St. Alphonsus Liguori, he said they are attacked by at least 100 times more demons than we lay people are attacked. Because the devil is a master military strategist. He knows. Take out the general and you'll get rid of loads of those. So whilst we have to be vocal sometimes in our criticism of our bishops, it must be done respectfully, and we must say all we're asking them, as Bishop Fulton Sheen said, we want our priests to be priests, we want our bishops to be bishops. And that's all I have for now. You're welcome.
So, and thank you, John. Yes, of course. And so John's giving you a flavour of what the Lumen Fidei Institute is about. Also, some of the other kind of areas that we will be focusing on in the coming months. We're going to have a conference. The conference on Tuesday in Maynooth is primarily about Catholic education and winning back our schools with a good solid ethos and formation of children. And that's an uphill battle, as many of you realise, but we have to start somewhere. Bishop Fonsi here, actually, I met him at the Divine Mercy Conference, and I think he's a good bishop. Maybe he's a little bit too cautious for some of us, and we'd like to see him kind of go over the trenches, leading his men into battle. But at least he has the right ideas, and so we can go over the trenches, and he can be kind of be in the planning room, and hopefully he'll be supporting us, and he won't fire any bullets at us as we're kind of charging at the enemy. But I think he's one of the better ones. So it's good news that you have Bishop Fonsi down here in Waterford. Also in the west of Ireland, Bishop Kevin Doran, again, a little bit quiet and shy for some of us, but at least he has the right mind and he thinks right. And really what our job is to do is to give them some courage, because all of these bishops are a little bit like the rabbit caught in the headlights. You know, they've been kind of battered by the media over the years, and so they don't want to, and everybody, we all want to be liked, we all want to be popular, we don't want to be we don't want to kind of go out there and just have tons of abuse hurled at us. And when you think of it, all the bishops have done over the past 10 years is had all that abuse thrown at them. And so they're a little bit kind of shy. Now some might say, I'm not saying this, but some might say, if they're not ready for the battle, they should kind of move on and make way for men who are ready for the battle. But, if that's not going to happen, we should kind of lead the battle for them and lead them into the battle. The other thing is, all of these kind of attacks they have one common source, and it's the source that Our Lady warned us about in Fatima, the errors of Russia, communism, Marxism, socialism, liberalism. It's always been the same ever since every revolution in history, going back to the French Revolution. And I know we have some E. Michael Jones fans in the audience here. He wrote a brilliant book called The Revolutionary Spirit, and it kind of goes through, you notice I deliberately dropped one word from the title of the book, but it goes through the whole history of revolution and it's a great book to read. But communism is at the heart of this, and socialism. Even with all this climate change nonsense, and again we had a talk at our conference in November down in Limerick, and we have CDs available on the videos on the website, CDs available to buy on climate change. Climate change is an attack on the family, communist attack to destroy the family, and it's not, people don't realise this, but Lord Monckton, when he gave his talk, explains it very well. The whole climate change drive is about the Western world, the developed Western world, and in particular the rich global companies preventing the development of Africa. Because if Africa built coal, the great enemy is coal, and we can't have any fossil fuels burned because they're destroying the planet. Africa is rich in resources and minerals. There are plenty of coal in Africa. And if the Africans developed coal-fired power stations, the economy there would boom. And there wouldn't be so many thousands of Africans trying to get into Europe, because they'd be able to develop their own lands with power. The great problem in Africa, and what causes all the poverty in Africa, is a lack of electricity. So they can't have the internet, they can't heat their homes at night when it gets cold there. They can't develop industry because there's no electric, they can't build roads. So, and it really is a ploy of the developed Western world, the global companies, these powerful corporations, to make sure the Africans remain poor, remain kind of these mini colonies, even though they're kind of supposedly independent now. And they're dependent on these large companies like Shell, like BP, like the Clinton Foundation for money. And so we have to expose this as well, and this whole kind of nonsense on climate change. The other kind of big threat which is coming our way, and it's actually 30 years ago this year since I was involved I was involved in a political group in England at the time. This year's the 30th anniversary of the Salman Rushdie affair, and I was watching a programme on I think it was on the BBC. Don't know if anyone saw it. It was about 30 years after Salman Rushdie, and I grew up just outside of Bradford, and they went back to Bradford. This kind of Muslim, young, kind of trendy Muslim journalist made the documentary for for the BBC, and it was all going well. It was all kind of very carefully stage managed to present these kind of Muslims. I mean, to be fair, he did ask some hard questions. And you know, just for those who aren't aware of it, what happened in Bradford 30 years ago was Salman Rushdie wrote a book which was critical of the Prophet Muhammad. It kind of, you know, I've never read the book, but it kind of criticised the Prophet, called him some names. And so the Ayatollah in Iran placed a fatwa on Salman Rushdie's head. And all the Muslims in England became very excited and went on the streets demonstrating and were burning effigies of Salman Rushdie. They went back to Bradford 30 years later, showed this thing. It was all going swimmingly well. They were asking the Muslims some hard questions. They were all saying, oh, well, maybe, you know, with experience we might have changed. And then at the very last 10 minutes of the show, the man was walking through, this Muslim journalist was walking through with the satanic verses in Bradford. A middle-aged Muslim man came, grabbed the book from him, started shouting all sorts of profanities at him. They continued filming and went off and burned the book. And then a kind of a group of young Muslims surrounded this BBC interviewer, and you know, were also just telling him to kind of go away and don't come back here. They weren't as friendly as I am. You know, it was pretty clear. And so the danger is, you know, many Muslims are good, decent, kind of law-abiding citizens, but there are two major difficulties with Islam. It's a militant religion, and you know, the Muslims regard the world as being split into two, and this is a simple fact that no imam or Muslim will deny. There's the Muslim world, which is governed by Sharia law, and then there is the non-Muslim world, which is not governed by Sharia law. And the mission of every single Muslim is to convert the non-Muslim world. And the non-Muslim world, and it's in the Quran, is called the world of war. And it's the war of, it's where war is, jihad. That's where it is, and it's the mission of every single Muslim to convert and to have Sharia law. And so here in Ireland, what we have to do, and we're kind of blessed in a way, in that we haven't got a large Muslim population here now. It's growing, and it's getting bigger, and if our Taoiseach has his way, Mr. Varadkar has a plan called, I think it's the 2040 plan, where by the year 2040 he wants to bring an extra million to a million people to Ireland. And this is all published, it's on the website, and it's very clear that the majority of those people who come here will be Muslims. And, you know, sadly as well, the other kind of major problem with our Western culture, and we can kind of talk about this as well later on, is, you know, most of our young families now are not having children. You know, so whereas before we had maybe 4 or 5 children in a family, that's gone. And, you know, there was a programme on earlier this week where a journalist for the Independent newspaper, I think she's already in her 30s, but she was talking about freezing her eggs so she could have children, you know, when she decides, not when nature decides she should have children, but when she wants to replace God as the creator of human life, and she wants to create these children in a test tube in a laboratory. Now, the Muslims don't do that. They have 10, 12 children, pack them all into a, you know, single room. I've seen it in Bradford. You know, a room this size, you might have 20 people living in it. And that, you know, that is quite common. And so not only are they, you know, doing what we Catholics should be doing, having children, procreation, bringing children up in their particular faith, but they're also, because of their large numbers, replacing our population. And so we have to be very aware of this. And it's no good to, if we lack young people, then there's a political slogan in Germany recently on a poster was New Germans ? And it kind of showed the New Germans was this Merkel's idea of allowing all these kind of immigrants in from the east. And it was, no thanks, we'll make our own. And a young lady, pregnant woman on the poster with a young family. And we have to get this, the way to kind of resist this kind of Muslim invasion, and it is an invasion of Europe, we can't call it anything else, is for us to be Catholic again, and for us to have our own young people, so that we don't need these extra people. Aside from anything, the other danger is, of course, that these kind of lands in the east and in the Arabian Peninsula, if we take all the young men away from those countries, then they are never going to be able to rebuild their own nations. So not only is it creating a problem here, it's also creating a problem in their own kind of cultural homelands, because there will be no one left to build from the ruins that sadly, unfortunately, America in particular created. But, we'll look at that, and we have a French priest who's agreed to come over, and also an expert on Islam from, I think she's from Denmark, a journalist who will come over and talk about that. And the main thing is as well, we have to really create local awareness and opposition against the building of mosques, because none of us here read or speak Arabic. Does anyone speak Arabic here? Read it? So we don't know what the imam is teaching these people in the mosque or the madrasa, and it really is too dangerous. The big mosque in Clonskee is being built by funded by a radical Pakistani Muslim organisation, which is even under kind of supervision and semi-banned in Pakistan. They're too extreme for the Pakistan government, and they're watching them, and yet they're moving to Ireland and building this big, massive mosque in Clonskee, which they boast will be one of the biggest mosques in Europe. And the other thing is that when they have their mosques in place, it's like a moth to the flame. We want them to be Catholic bishops. That's all we want. We don't want them to be anything else. We're not asking them to become, World War II generals and follow. We don't want General Patton running the bishops' conference. We just want our bishops to be simply Catholic and be the shepherds. And I think it was Fulton Sheen who said, "There's one thing worse than a wolf in sheep's clothing, and that's a shepherd in wolf's clothing." So, we want them to take off this wolf's clothing that some of them have. And so we're going to hand in a petition. It'll have 10 points. We'll put it in the next issue of Catholic Voice, so you'll be able to, and it'll be up on the website. And briefly, the 10 points are, and then we can have a discussion about, and you might have some ideas yourself, and it's not too late to add them into the petition if they're good ideas. John, is it John? It's not too late. It's never too late. So, and these are in no particular order. So number one is, and it'll be all dressed up. It won't just be kind of written on a scrap of paper like this. It'll be kind of presented in kind of grown-up writing, and with a nice introduction, won't it? But so number one, reform schools so that our schools become Catholic again. So there's none of this nonsense where the kids come home and you say, "Oh, what did you do today, Billy?" "Oh, we had a yoga session." Because some of the children were getting a bit agitated. So the teacher thought we needed a safe space, and she decided that we'd have some yoga meditation, and now I've turned into a little snowflake, and you're going to have to cancel your subscription to Catholic Voice because it's an evil, nasty thing, and we should all be living with our fellow men. We don't want our children to be like that. So we want the schools to be reformed. We don't want any LGBT ideology in the schools. These kind of rainbow flags in Catholic schools. Who would have thought that 5 years ago we would even be discussing this? I've lived in Ireland now for 20 years, and I mean, when I first came here, I never thought that we would have to say, I used to, the thing I used to be kind of riled about is, the principal's a sister and she's not in a habit. That was it was as simple as that. Why isn't sister wearing a habit? She should be if she's the principal. What's going on here? But now, I never thought, even at that time, that we'd be talking about this LGBT ideology. It's just come on us like a storm overnight. And so we have to demand that our schools are reformed and become Catholic again. The second thing is, the Vatican Summit on abuse was very good. Let's not take anything away from that. It was needed. But we also need our bishops to recognise that there is more than one form of abuse. Rightly concentrated on the abuse of minors. But there is also the majority of the abuse carried out by people like Cardinal McCarrick is on young adult men in seminaries. And we need to protect those men in our seminaries. And we need to have the church own up to the problem, so that when you send a son or daughter into a religious house of formation, you know that they're safe from these kind of predatory adults who use psychological kind of mind-bending techniques to pervert them. And it really is the most evil form of abuse that I have encountered. And sadly, it happens in our seminaries in the West. And we have to finish it, and we have to have the Vatican own up to this and clean the system out. With that, then, the third point is we're going to ask for the seminary in Maynooth to be closed and kind of put on ice, because let's face it, the seminary now only has a handful of men. All the young men with vocations I talk to are going to study outside of Ireland, or they're going to the Dominicans. And that sadly means that the people who go into Maynooth are, either it's the last resort for them, or they're not really good candidates for the priesthood. And how can they be when that seminary has been suffered so much scandal? So the easiest thing to do would be to close it for a time, and for individual bishops to open up seminaries in their own diocese. So Bishop Fonsi could begin a seminary here in Waterford. And this happens in England. It's not kind of new. Bishop Mark Davis in Shrewsbury, Bishop Philip Egan in Plymouth, they have many vocations. The Institute of Christ the King, their seminary is full. I've visited it and been there, and it's full to the rafters. They're building extra spaces. The Fraternity of St. Peter, all of these traditional seminaries is where our young people should go, until the Irish bishops have a team of people that can come in to the seminary in Maynooth and reform it in a Catholic way. And then following on from that point, and the Pope Francis himself said this, so I'm agreeing with Pope Francis and echoing his words. He said that homosexuals are not suitable for the priesthood. And if it's good enough for Pope Francis, it should be good enough for our bishops here in Ireland. And all they can simply say is, you know, that same-sex attracted men are not suitable candidates for the priesthood. It's there in many of the Vatican documents, and as I say, Pope Francis have said it, so we'll be saying that to them. The fifth point is we need our bishops to kind of, and we'll have the backbone transplants with us, so we can give them a bit of backbone to do this. I don't think we'll have that machine at the procession, will we? But we're kind of building it in our laboratory to kind of give them some backbone, and it will be that they have to correct clergy that dissent from the church teaching. So when a priest stands up in a Sunday Mass and uses the homily to say, oh, you know, it's all changed now and it's okay for Johnny and Bill to get married, and you know, I can't give them a blessing at the moment because the church is so outdated, but hopefully in a few years I'll be able to. But here they are in the congregation, give them a round of applause and let's apologise for all the kind of the way the church has made them suffer over the years, as happens in some churches. Or when you have a priest in Dublin standing up and saying, I'm going to be voting yes in the same-sex marriage referendum, I encourage everybody else here to do it. You know, we need the bishop to say this is wrong, and I'm sorry, but we are short a priest, but he's going off on sabbatical. And until he comes back and can guarantee to me that he'll teach the church teaching, then he should be. Secondly, it shouldn't just stop at priests. We should have the Archbishop of Dublin should publicly correct Josepha Madigan. Instead of inviting her to Mass on the 1st of January, the very day in which the abortion referendum that she championed and pushed through and is now pursuing with demonic delight, he should be correcting her. He shouldn't be inviting her to Mass and saying, "Oh, I'm now friends with Josepha, and she's a good lady." You know, no, little wonder we struggle to get a letter of good standing from him when his kind of collaborators and fellow travellers are people like Miss Madigan. And look at the kind of way in which Madigan and the other lady, O'Connell, is she, the Fine Gael, are just, are pursuing this with just, it's like they've taken over the sweet shop. It's perverse the way they're carrying on. And we were told all along that this would be one of the most restrictive regimes, and don't worry about voting yes because it'd be really restrictive. And now they're just, making it one of the most open, one of the most liberal in Europe, and our bishops are remaining silent. It's just not good enough. And then for the Archbishop of Dublin, when good, brave men and women are standing outside those abortion mills trying to save young women from the horror of abortion, then he kicks the boot into them as well and says they shouldn't be protesting, and he wouldn't, if it was him, he wouldn't save babies in car parks. They should be a mile away from the thing. I mean, this is just scandalous. And we have to say to our bishops, we can't tolerate this anymore, and if you're not speaking out, we will be. Sixthly, and I'll just go through these quickly now, then we can have questions and answers. We need a proper, authentic marriage preparation course for our young families. None of this kind of, neoliberal nonsense that the young people are exposed to these days. And following on from that, we need the bishops to close Accord. Accord is the marriage guidance council for the bishops' conference. However, like Judas was bribed with 30 pieces of silver, I think with inflation, 30 pieces of silver has now become millions of euros. I think how much funding do Accord get? They get a few million. I think it could be over 10 million, but I could be wrong. But it's certainly in the millions. So in order for that 30 pieces of silver, Accord, the Catholic agency for marriage guidance, have now agreed to counsel same-sex couples. So it's almost as if the church is saying, well, you know, we'll take your money and we'll just ignore our own teaching. I mean, it's scandalous. And so if they can't stand up to these politicians and these bullies and thugs in Leinster House, then they should close Accord down. And I'm quite sure that good, faithful Catholics would fund an alternative to that, a private agency that could counsel Catholics in need of help. In a similar vein, point number 8 is, we will ask the bishops closed down the Cora crisis pregnancy counselling service, yet the website is still up there. So the Cora website's up there and it simply says we've closed down. If you need information, follow these links. And it's all links into the pro-abortion counselling services by Positive Options. So they need to take down the Cora website and they need to establish a directive pregnancy counselling service that will direct young women who go to it and help them not to go through with the abortion. It needs to be directive counselling. There's no positive option. There's no choice. You know, having an abortion is not a positive option. And so we need to kind of understand where the young woman is and try and help her and sustain her through that pregnancy and give her the help and support post-pregnancy. And they need to establish, and if they don't have the courage to do that, then they should give the money that they're using for Cora, or give some fund and give it to Ask Magella, and say we'll ask Magella $500,000. Here it is, you know, and here's a donation. Extend your services if they don't want to do it themselves. Number 9, Catholic hospitals. Now again, when I first came here, I didn't think we'd ever have to be saying this to our bishops. But Catholic hospitals, with a Catholic ethos, it's very simple, very black and white, should not be performing abortions. And if they are forced to perform abortions, then the bishop, the early bishops, let's look at a few of the early bishops and a few of the early apostles. St. Paul, what happened to him? St. Peter, what happened to him? St. Thomas, what happened to the majority of the apostles or the early martyrs when they were, you know, what about, for example, the Christians in Syria, the priests in Syria who say Mass every Sunday and don't know, it's a 50-50 chance whether they're going to get a bullet through their head. It's as simple as that. And all the Chinese Catholic bishops who are beaten up by the Communist Party now, empowered by this new deal that the Vatican have done with them. And so any of the underground bishops are dragged in the streets and tormented. So if our bishops, you know, are given a fine or a slap on the wrist in the magistrate's court, or they're given a suspended sentence, you know, far better to get a suspended sentence for that than some of the suspended sentences we've seen for clergy like of the likes of McCarrick, a far nobler cause to challenge the status quo and to protect children. And if they're not prepared to do that, then what they can do is remove the Catholic patronage from the hospitals and resign from those hospitals. And so that there is no kind of shadow of a doubt that they are Catholic. And then the final thing that we'll be asking for, and perhaps the most difficult for them for very obvious reasons, and the most urgently needed, is we need financial transparency from the bishops, from their accounts, because it's very clear that people like Maciel, people like McCarrick, people like Rembert Weakland. Rembert Weakland, the former Archbishop of Milwaukee, who paid a young man $450,000 US over a period of time to keep him quiet. You know, we need those books wide open, and we need to be able to follow the money, and we need to say, you know, and if the bishops have nothing to hide, there's nothing to worry about. You know, they should appoint an independent auditor to go in there and look at the books, and if there's, you know, tens of thousands of pounds going to some strange kind of bank account, then you know, questions need to be asked, and the bishop may have to resign. But you know, let's be under no doubt, our church has been infiltrated. It's been infiltrated now for a very, very long time, and these people who have kind of remained quiet for many years are now becoming more vocal, because they're becoming more confident, because they think they're in control. And so we, as Fulton Sheen kind of famously said, you know, it will not be the bishops or the clerics that reform the church, it will be the lay people, and it really is down to us. And so that's the petition we're going to hand in. You know, we know that we're doing the right thing. We're all fallen men ourselves, so we'll all make mistakes. We're bound to. You know, none of us here are perfect. But we just have to answer this call, and we have to try and fix our broken culture, if not for our sake, then for the sake of our grandchildren and their children. So thank you for listening, and we'll kind of open it up to questions.
Just one point on the financial transparency. What you're looking for there is, if a priest has done something he shouldn't have done, and a financial settlement has been made to keep him quiet, we don't necessarily need to know the priest's name. We need to know that he's out of ministry. Or if it's a case of the bishop needs to either resign, and if he doesn't resign, then the details need to be published. That's how McCarrick got away for so long. They paid off the victims, and so we just need to find out. And again, those transactions can be easily spotted. If suddenly there's a lay person and there's 20,000, 30,000 a month going in for a year, you suddenly say, hold on a minute, what are you paying this for?